Welcome to The Universe Next Door, a program which probes every week the clash of worldviews, different perspectives on life, on God, on the universe, on the purpose for which we are here. Bill Carl, you are here for a great and mighty purpose.
I'm here to serve you, Dr.
That's
Woodward.
right. You have definite purpose. I think there is teleology. That's the fancy word
exactly
for
right.
purpose. And, of course, the God that we know in our personal relationship with Him as our Lord, as our Savior, as our Redeemer, and even as introduced by Jesus Himself in the book of John as our friend, that God is the one who makes Himself manifest in many ways, including the intricacy and the excellence of the creation around us. Today we have with us on the phone not just one, but two doctors who are by the same last name, Mokulis and Dr. Joseph. I think you go by Joe in a personal setting, Dr. Joseph Mokulis. Is that correct?
Yes,
yeah,
that's correct.
And then your wife is also on the line, Dr. Elizabeth. How are you today, both of you?
We're doing fine today. I'm happy to be here.
Well, thank you. I wanted to introduce you right up front because I had a unique opportunity when I was participating in a seminar at the Discovery Institute just a few months ago in Seattle, Washington, to meet both of you. And we actually enjoyed a wonderful lunch together. I think it was a Saturday afternoon. And as I was hearing your story about especially, Dr. Joe, as you were trying to struggle with your ultimate conclusions about God, about the universe, about man, whether man was just a product of evolution, unguided process of nature, or whether there was really evidence for a creator. And when I heard the amazing tale of how a book had been left, or placed, maybe is the right word, on the nightstand, and had been sort of avoided or ignored, at least to some extent. And finally, that book came to the top of your stack and you delved into it. I was just amazed. So as we get into this discussion, really the story of the two of you together seeking the truth. And of course, Dr. Elizabeth, if you could just explain where is your specialty, since both of you are medical doctors, and then maybe, Joe, you could come in and share what is your background a little bit. First, Elizabeth, if you could share with our listening audience of The Universe Next Door your story, your background.
Sure. I'm trained as an infectious disease doctor, although I'm currently not practicing medicine because when my children were small, I decided that it would be more important for me to stay home with them. But I am an infectious disease doctor by training.
Wow. And where did you do your training, if I can just add that little question?
Well, my medical school was Harvard Medical School, and then I was in the United States Air Force, so I did all of my infectious disease work and internal medicine in San Antonio, Texas, at Wilford Hall Medical Center.
Fantastic. Well, I of course, being a Princeton graduate, will avoid any digs against Harvard during the broadcast. But the two of you met, and I believe at some point, or at least early in your marriage, Elizabeth, you had either been or became a follower of Jesus Christ. Is that correct?
Yes. I grew up in the Episcopal Church, but I didn't have much real faith, I guess, until sometime in my 20s when I began to wonder whether God was real. And I guess I really came to know Jesus Christ just through reading the Bible and meeting Jesus there. That's pretty much how I came to faith and to understanding that God is real and not just something that happened 2,000 years ago.
Wow. What an amazing and very, very powerful encounter through Scripture itself, through the words of God in the Bible. And of course, when you were married, I guess, Dr. Joe, if you would just tell us a little bit about your background, your specialty in education, and then maybe how you met, just a bit of that.
Well, I am from Connecticut, and I did undergraduate in chemical engineering at the University of Connecticut. And then I decided I'd rather go to medical school, so I got an Air Force scholarship to pay for medical school. Mm-hmm. And then I also got accepted to the Wilford Hall program, which was the big Air Force program down in San Antonio, and began my general surgery and then on to urology residency there. And that's where we first met. We both had finished medical school and were interns at Wilford Hall in 1989, and that's where we met when we first got there.
And so your journey together as a couple began really through that experience. Wilford Hall, is that an actual medical training facility for the Air Force?
Yes, it has been, although it's a little smaller now, but it was the big 1,000-bed Air Force hospital at that time. That was the biggest Air Force flagship hospital for medical training.
Wow. In case you've joined us today, we have with us Dr. Joseph and Dr. Elizabeth Mokulis, and your residence is in Alabama, do I understand?
Right now we live in Alabama, that's correct.
Very good. Well, joining us today to share their story, and it's an amazing story. As I said, I got a chance to hear it sitting at lunch. And if you would just sort of, as I get into the heart of the story, talk about this book that Elizabeth, you found it and discovered it. It's by Michael Denton. It's one of the founding books of the intelligent design movement by Michael Denton, himself a medical expert and a geneticist living still in Australia, I believe. Tell the story of how you discovered the book and you began to kind of put it to the attention of your husband, Joseph.
Well, I actually learned about the whole intelligent design movement first from reading a book by Dr. William Dembski, and it was entitled Intelligent Design, and I was really excited when I read that book because I realized that intelligent design could remove an intellectual stumbling block for people, a stumbling block toward faith for a lot of people. And so I began to look for more books about evolution and about intelligent design, and that's how I came across Evolution, a Theory in Crisis, which really addressed a lot of the problems with Darwinian evolution. And as my husband will probably tell in his story, it seemed that that was the foundation of his worldview and the reason that he was comfortable being an atheist. And so I felt that that would be a wonderful book for him to read to sort of challenge some of his views.
His basic guiding assumptions, you might say, of that worldview. So back to you, Joseph. If you could share a little bit, and this is where I remember so vividly, seated at that lunch table at the Discovery Institute, what you shared. Just give us the story, pretty much blow by blow, as you first ignored and eventually came to the confrontation or experience with that book.
Well, sure, I'd love to. I was brought up in a household with a mother and a father. My father was a avowed atheist, and my mother was a Catholic. My mother would drag us off to Catholic church every week. But being my father, I knew my father was right, and I knew my mother was wrong. So we kind of played the game. At least I didn't. I think my brother and sister are probably still atheists because of this. But we believed my father was right, and the God thing was wrong. So I went to church, and we went to catechism and, did all the things that Catholic children are supposed to do. And I eventually got to the point where I was, in catechism, and I just told my mother, all right, I will be confirmed for you. I don't believe a shred of this, but I'll get my confirmation in Catholic Church, and then I will never step foot in church again because it's a bunch of nonsense. And she said, fine, good enough for me. Do it, And so that's exactly what I did. I became confirmed. I said I believed, but I didn't believe a single solitary thing. And I was rock solid atheist. I had my science foundation. I had evolution to explain everything for me. I was completely comfortable being an atheist. And then I lived my life. I went to college. I went to medical school. I started residency with Elizabeth. And eventually we came to the point where we became engaged and became married. And then she said, we're going to go to church. And I said, that's fine. We'll go to church, and I can play that game. That's not going to kill me. I know my wife is very smart, and but how she can be so wrong about that, I kind of put that aside. But I was right. She was wrong. I'll play church, and that's what I did. We'd go to church, and I'd sit there, and I wouldn't believe any of it. But eventually, we had children, and once we had children, and they started to get a little older, then the concept of Pascal's wager started to bother me. And that Pascal's wager, for your audience that may not know it, is, there's only a couple possible situations. Either there is or there is not God, and either you believe or you don't believe. And there's only 4 combinations in there. And really, there's only one winning combination of the 4. And the winning combination is if you believe and if there is a God, then you have the potential for eternal happiness, heaven, what have you. If there is no God, you have nothing. You have meaningless. You have oblivion. So that's 2 of the choices. And then there's the other one that if there is God, but you don't believe, then potentially you have the especially bad option of hell. So I was fine with it for myself. I was like, I could take hell. If I'm wrong, I'll go to hell. You know, everyone goes to hell. I can take it. It didn't bother me a bit. But it did bother me that I could bring my children with me. That's what started to gnaw at me.
Wow.
And so it kind of just kept floating in my background mind. And around this time when it was in my life, it was like bothering me, but not bothering me enough to do anything about it. My wife had put Michael Denton's book, Evolution, A Theory in Crisis, on my nightstand. I'd say it took at least 2 years. It was sitting on that nightstand collecting dust, if not longer. And that's what I would do at night before bed, is just sit down, read for an hour or so, and then go to bed. So it was an every night thing, but there was always something better to read than that. And it, being the atheist that I was, I thought, it's just a complete waste of my time. I mean, that's just a joke. Evolution, A Theory in Crisis. The evolution is proven. I mean, there's no crisis. It's not even hardly a theory. And so I just ignored it for years. But eventually, one night I ran out of things to read. I'd come up short, and I looked around, and I'd read everything in my room, and all right, I thought, this should be a joke. And, here I am. I'm a chemical engineer. I was a top of my class chemical engineer. I knew science. I love science. I still love science. And so I thought, chemical engineer, I got that background. I got medicine background. I know science. I'm just going to tear this thing apart. And so I started it. And what it did is it tore me apart.
Wow.
It's very simple, straightforward. You don't need to be a chemical engineer. You don't need to be a doctor to understand that book. It's very practical and to layman's terms, but the arguments are clear and solid, and the facts are the facts. And as he went from chapter to chapter to chapter, just tearing it down piece by piece, by the end of the book, it was rubble. And it wasn't that I didn't understand. I understood perfectly well the theory of evolution and the facts that he mentioned, but I didn't realize what that fact said, in fact, pointed to. And this newer discoveries in science had undermined prior facts that I was unaware of. So by the end of that book, my foundation was washed away, and I was just floating in limbo.
Wow.
So from there, I also went to more books on intelligent design. And
now, was Elizabeth guiding you at this point? Were you actually opening up to her and suggesting things, or did you reveal this to her right away?
No, I didn't say anything to her. I just read it along, and eventually I said, I told her, what it meant to me, and maybe she remembers something differently.
Well, I just wanted to say that I was the one who picked out all those books you were reading. Because they were in our house, because I had read them.
That's right. I recall that now. I don't remember how I got them, but they were already in the house.
That's great.
She just laid one after the other out for me.
And so this was really, at this point, it was in the mid-'90s. Had Michael Behe's book been published yet, Darwin's Black Box? Or was this before?
It had, but I don't think I had read that one at that point. I did read a Michael Behe book, but I think it was the one after Black Box that I eventually read.
Wow. Yeah, The Edge of Evolution is equally powerful.
Exactly.
Well, today with us, Dr. Joseph Mokulis and Dr. Elizabeth Mokulis, husband and wife team, you might say, both in their marriage and also as medical doctors. Elizabeth, an infectious disease specialist. Do I have it right there?
Yes.
Yeah, and then, of course, Dr. Joseph, urologist. We are really excited about the opportunity to hear your story. At that point that you became convinced that the macro evolutionary story, the Darwinian story, was rubble. There was no scientific evidence for macro, large scale, the big tree of life picture of evolution. Did you immediately begin asking, maybe there's something to the God hypothesis? I mean, how did Christianity then present itself to you as an option?
That's a good question, and it was kind of a gradual process. I was around it because I was playing church with my children for all these years, so it wasn't that I wasn't hearing the message. I was just going in one ear and out the other. So I guess it kind of became, I began to believe. I began to believe that was true, whereas before I had believed that it was nonsense, and it was just a gradual blending from disbelief to true belief.
Wow.
Now it's, I'm all in. It's 100% for me.
That's great. Well, again, Dr. Joseph and Elizabeth Mokulis, who have had this experience of being shaken, you might say, shocked, is a phrase that C.S. Lewis used when he referred in his letter to BBC Radio to the series of talks he was actually outlining in his mind. And he said to the BBC radio broadcasting officials who had written him a letter inviting him to come on BBC during World War II, he said we could call it the art of being shocked. And it sounds like you had a bit of a shock yourself, Dr. Joseph.
I would say that's exactly what it was. I'd be happy to be categorized in something that C.S. Lewis said in any way, shape, or form, but that's exactly what it felt like. It was just when you change your worldview because it's the opposite. It isn't just different. It's the opposite. And I think that's why people have such a hard time going from one to the other, because it isn't just believing something different. It's believing the opposite of what you believe.
Right.
That's what makes it so hard in my mind.
Exactly. A quick question on practicality and relevance today. As intelligent design as a movement turns 30 years old this next couple months, celebrating the 30th anniversary of when Denton's book was released in Great Britain, what do you see as the most exciting development? We have about 30 seconds that you see happening in intelligent design. At least one thing.
Well, I think the whole what's being seen in science is information is the most fundamental thing in the universe that Dr. Dembski, his new book, discussed. But I think that really is, to me, extraordinarily powerful, and it goes right along, hand in hand with what the Bible's been saying all along.
Yes.
I think that's a difficult concept, a very difficult concept, but I think it all fits beautifully in one beautiful picture,
right.
Science and the Bible.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was Christ, of course, in our understanding theologically, but the Word is information. I'd like to thank Dr. Joseph and Dr. Elizabeth Mokulis for sharing your amazing story. I'd love to have you back on here again sometime, but thank you today for listening to The Universe Next Door.